Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. My name is Emma, and I've got Charles with me, and we're going to be talking about the evolution of the actuarial field. But before I get into all the questions that I've got for you, can you give everybody an introduction?
Hi, I'm Charles Johnson. I am an actuary. I've worked in the life insurance industry for about 10 years, and I run an organization called the Actuarial Development Institute that's focused on serving the actuarial community.
Great. So this is why you're like the best person to have this conversation with. So to get us started, I always like to lay like a foundation for everybody joining, and especially maybe people that aren't super familiar with the career. Can you give us a little bit of a history of what that evolution has looked like over the last 50 years?
Yeah, I'll go back even a little further because I think it helps provide some context. The insurance profession and the actuarial profession have evolved together, and the need and the demand from actuaries stemmed from some of the early challenges that happened in the insurance industry. So if you think back to like kind of the fundamentals of which insurance are, it's promises, right? You give the insurance company money and we promise to pay you back later. And early in American history, there were some insurance companies who were collecting money and then going out of business and spending that money before the claims came in that they had to pay out. And so regulators, in order to protect the general public, started requiring very competent math calculations that proved that the amount of money insurance companies were charging was the right amount, and the amount of money set aside was enough to pay for the future promises they'd made. And so the actuarial profession as a whole is protected in a regulatory sense. We're required to sign the pricing and the reserving, which is the money you set aside for the entire insurance industry. And we've always served that role, but how we've done that, I think, has evolved quite a bit over time. So when I started in the insurance world, I sat next to someone who was an actuary who talked about a time when there were just a few computers in the office that was being shared. And, at this time before that, the actuarial profession was really just deeply mathematics, doing hand, paper and pencil calculations to figure out how much money to charge, how much probability of loss there is. And as computers came on, it really changed the way that actuaries did their job. There was some crisis that, now the math is going to be done by a computer. What do we need these people with, pencil and paper? But all it really did was enable actuaries to layer more and more mathematics on and become much more effective at their job. And before, where it might take, months to do a study, we can now do it in days. And that really allowed us to transition to much more business and decision making. We now run models that project out 100 years worth of potential financial results. We advise decision makers within insurance companies about how to make decisions next year or the year after. We think about emerging trends and things that are coming up to kind of predict and change the way that we build and price insurance. And even in really short-term insurance products like auto, where you're getting data back every 6 months, we're building predictive models and using machine learning to try to, automate and improve the way that we make decisions. And so, this kind of trajectory of the evolution of the actuarial career is at another very interesting turning point. On the one hand, it faces the same pressures that I think all professions face right now. You have this rapidly emerging artificial intelligence. I think a lot about, I sat next to someone where not everyone had a computer. What will it be like, in 30 or 40 years when I'm at the end of my career and I'm trying to explain to someone else how different it was when I started? And there's just that rate of technological change is so rapid right now that I think it's very challenging sometimes for legacy professions, large institutional ones, to change. And I will say, I think the actuarial profession has done a good job trying to adapt to some of those skills. But what I see is the biggest pressure kind of going, from 50 years to today is the change in demographics. And that is the people who become actuaries are very traditionally high quality math. right? We just love math to our core, and it's very fundamental to what we do. But the demand for that skill set and the job availability for people with that skill set has increased substantially, particularly in the last 5 years with the emergence of data analysts, data scientists, and software engineering. And so a lot of what's affecting the profession is less the emergence of technology and more the change in the availability of people with the skill set and the qualifications to do what actuaries do.
So I want to talk now. So thank you for that, because I think that you mentioned it. This is something that not just the actuarial profession is seeing. We're seeing these changes all across the board. And so I'm interested to see if we can take some of your answer for this next question and apply it broadly as well. But can you share a little bit about what you're advising people those skills of the future are and what they should be building today in order to be ready for some of these changes?
Yeah. There's one particular joke that I heard recently about actuaries that I think maybe put some things in context. So an actuary is talking to his friend that's a lawyer, and the lawyer says, when I go to parties and someone asks me what I do and I tell them that I'm a lawyer, their facial expressions change and they become a bit more standoffish to me. And the actuary says, "That's so nice that you have enough friends to get invited to parties." And so, I think that historically, again, our love of math and like doing exams has made us protected in that we can just do these technical skills. But what I see the future of our profession, of these professions that understand the context of what they're doing, not just doing the work, but the context with which it's being done in, and accountants, for example. Yeah, they can put together an income statement or a balance sheet, but they also understand the context with how that affects the larger organization. And so I see actuaries, along with other professions, now needing to be able to focus a lot more on communication skills. And I'll maybe just provide some context about the employment changes that are going on in the actuarial field. Like many high demand fields, there's a lot more jobs than there are people to fill them right now. But there's also a very large change in the pipeline of people becoming actuaries. So the number of people taking exams is down 40% in the last 7 years. Most major institutions have enrollment down 40% from a student population perspective. And what's happening is, as I talk to people in the field, a lot of those traditional roles that are filled exclusively by people that are qualified as actuaries are now being filled by people that are specialized to do part of the work. So outsourcing, to data science teams and bringing in software engineers, bringing in accountants. And I think this diversification of skill sets inside, traditional actuarial roles is going to require actuaries to build communication and leadership skills that function across all of these different practice areas, where traditionally you might have a team of pure actuaries and the demand for that communication skill isn't there. And what's even more interesting is if you look at, the actuarial profession is very dependent on the younger pipeline. Like if you look at an insurance as a whole, it's a much older demographic. I think it's one of the oldest average age industries of any industry out there. But to be an actuary, because one, you have to invest a lot initially to get really good ROI in terms of time, and two, just the challenge of taking exams when you have kids, when you're later in life. Like I think it's a great profession, and I encourage people to do it. But understandably, the majority of that pipeline comes from young people, especially those in college. And so as you see kind of this shift away, not only that, but you're seeing a lot of impact in communication skills in the youth. And so I think it's really important that as part of development, particularly early in your career, people are working on their leadership and communication skills to bridge the gap of the new and emerging technology and the decision makers that are making this.
So you and I, well, first, I laughed at your joke, but I'm so used to trying to be quiet on the other end. It's like a weird whisper laugh. So that's not in the recording. But two, I think, I mentioned this idea of seeing some of these skills possibly go broader than just the actuarial profession. And you and I had this conversation a little when we were getting ready for this discussion. So one of the things that I always talk about is like in a world full of technology, we're going to need to sharpen our soft skills. And you just
Hmm.
touched on things like leadership, communication, problem solving, all these things that we used to look at. And I say this as a past teacher, as, we had social emotional learning and that kind of thing. But those were kind of innate things that we assumed people were good at or weren't good at.
Hmm.
And you were steered in a career one direction or another because of that. Now, as we use technology to take out some of those maybe less human-esque skills from a process, that's going to become what's really important. So I think that what you're talking about is trends that we're going to see across pretty much every profession as we lean more into using technology to take that analytical side of things over for us.
Yeah, I'll even say like one step further is that I really liked your point that traditionally we assume them being innate. But I just had this conversation with someone who's worked in academia for 50 years. And they said, the change in the last 10 years has been nothing like the previous 40. So if we value communication and leadership skills, we have to be intentional about its development and not assume that it's something that comes naturally, because clearly the world we're living in is not necessarily as conducive as it was to building that skill set.
Well, and that gives me the perfect segue then. So where I want to end our conversation is talking a little bit about what you're doing to help people build these skills and the work that you're driving forward.
Yeah, great question. I love the actuarial profession. I love being an actuary. I think both the process of becoming an actuary and the career path that you have are very rewarding and afford an enormous amount of opportunity. So, as I mentioned, the pipeline is shrinking pretty significantly. So, a lot of what I do right now is I work with universities around the nation to figure out how to better market their programs, how to communicate and explain to the next generation what the value of becoming an actuary and studying for it is. I think this is a challenge I would put to the insurance industry. And, Emma, I applaud what you're doing. But students that are deciding what they want to do for a living are increasingly concerned with how sexy it sounds rather than the actual career path itself. And I think insurance could use some better branding in that regard. How do we explain these traditional insurance roles and professional roles to a generation who probably doesn't have as positive a view as the people who actually work in it, have? And we do a lot of leadership and communication development. I find the collegiate world just this phenomenal opportunity to try out different skill sets, to wear different hats that will allow you the growth and opportunity to be successful on the job. We also host career fairs and conferences to help bridge connections between companies and students to increase that exposure, to give students more opportunities to practice those skills. We've also designed, most insurance and consulting companies have some sort of leadership development program, and it's focused mostly on exam and technical skills. But as I said, I feel that we really have to be intentional with that next level skill set. So I have built out a 3-month program for insurance companies and consulting companies that focuses on that leadership and communication development, and particularly on career development. I think this is true of almost all technical and analytic backed professions, whether it's engineering or actuarial science. And that's, so much of your career early on is dependent on your ability to do really high quality technical work. But then one day they're like, great, can you manage this team of technical people? And that management skill set is so much different than that technical skill set that you built to get to that point in your career. And I think it's very important for companies to make an investment before people are in this roles to develop that skill set so that they can be successful when they get to that next level. And then the final thing that we're doing some research on right now is, like many professions, the actuarial profession requires continuing education. And so we're working on building out ways to provide continuing education that help actuaries see the math and the technical work they do and apply it to all these non-traditional settings that I think are really needed right now. Whether you just look at the volatility and the things that have gone in the banking industry in the last 6 to 7 months, that's exactly the kind of thing that actuaries are primed to be able to help solve. And so trying to think of the actuary as a more complete professional and help build that brand that we really can solve some of the most challenging problems that are facing society right now.
Well, hopefully the work that we're both doing, along with a number of other millennials and Gen X that are coming into the insurance field will help pull in some other folks and get them to realize it's a nice place to be.
Maybe that's a good way to end it, Emma. Thank you for all you're doing.
We're just going to keep doing our work to get you here, guys. But if you're not already, everybody watching, make sure that you follow Charles on LinkedIn. Make sure that you're staying up to date with what he's doing in the space. And certainly let either one of us know if you've got any questions. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining me and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Leading Change. If you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe and come back weekly for more expert interviews on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.